all they probably do is squeal, but chill. When we start the revolution, when we start the revolution, all they probably do is squeal, but chill.
Inside these walls at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary is Dr. Mutulu Shakur. He pioneered the use of acupuncture in the treatment of addiction during the drug plague that swept in and took on epidemic proportions during the escalation of the Vietnam War after 1965. Hardest hit were the black and Latin communities. Among the worst was the South Bronx, where young people literally were lying in the street from the effects of drugs. The problem of how to fight this new scourge was on the minds of every organizer. Mutulu Shakur was part of a movement that included the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, and the Republic of New Africa that had taken over the Lincoln Hospital demanding drug detoxification programs for the South Bronx. The takeover led to the formation of Lincoln Detox, where these pioneering treatments were developed as an alternative to government-sponsored programs that pushed methadone, an equally addictive synthetic drug used as a substitute for heroin, as the solution. Mutulu Shakur has been behind these bars for the last 13 years. As he sat down on the table across from us, he took out a clipping from his folder with a picture of slain rap artist Tupac Shakur. "This is my son," he said. With this very personal comment, Mutulu began to unfold the story of a struggle for social activism and alternative medicine, particularly acupuncture, as a method for fighting the drug epidemic, and how doing this pitted them against the whole government establishment. Those were tumultuous times. There were protests and rebellions and repression amidst the steady drumbeat of the body bags coming back from Vietnam. Funerals occurred in the black and Latin and Native American communities with far greater frequency than elsewhere. Many in the black and Latin community felt they were the victims of an undeclared war, something called COINTELPRO, short for the counterintelligence program of the FBI and the big city police departments. Many leaders were cut down in the midst of critical struggles by the police or assassins' bullets, from Reverend Martin Luther King to Malcolm X to Fred Hampton and so many others. The drugs flooded in everywhere, relentlessly, from campuses to the community, particularly after protests or unrest. And so many were jailed. Many were to remain in those prisons for decades. Prison population began to skyrocket, so that today there are 5 times as many prisoners as 3 decades ago. Organizers in the community, like Mutulu Shakur, saw this as an effort to criminalize and destroy a generation of youth, rebellious youth, a plague brought on by the establishment that saw getting people high as the answer to the conditions of poverty and the weekly death toll from the war that had people seething with anger in the late 1960s and early 70s.
We were able to demonstrate that social and political activity, along with acupuncture, would help detoxify people off of drugs quicker than just.
Lincoln Detox had become the center of that movement to fight drugs with acupuncture and the struggle for social justice.
Yeah, and that's my favorite line of work, healing. I think I do that better than I do anything else.
So, could you tell our audience a little bit about your history as a political activist, as a revolutionary? You know, just give us a brief overview of who you are and really why you're here in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary.
That's a two-pronged question. Why am I here in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary is a long story about the treatment of political prisoners and prisoners of war within the context of U.S. prison system in particular. Who I am, I believe, reflects their attitude towards me. I think that I am considered a part of the new African independence movement. And that movement recruited me at the age of 15. I was involved with a man in a community called South Jamaica, Queens. And I think that anybody who knows anything about New York knows that South Jamaica, Queens is considered a middle-class black neighborhood. And the most interesting thing about that neighborhood was that all of the people in the 60s, late 50s, who had responsibility for the broad community, for the extended family in our community, the teachers, the nurses, the principals, the cops even, the firemen, were all very race-conscious people. So we came from a community that had Shakur, who had Asada Shakur, who had Herman Ferguson. Mm-hmm. So we grew up in a very race-conscious time. And at the time that I was 13 or 14, I became a son of a man by Abdul Shakur, Saladin Abdul Shakur. And he was the father. Actually, I was 12. He was the father of Lumumba Shakur and Zaid Shakur. For those people who don't know who Lumumba Shakur is, the famous Panther 21 case was Lumumba Shakur et al., and that was my brother. And Zaid Shakur was the comrade who was killed when Asada Shakur was captured on the New Jersey Turnpike. Both of them their father took me in. I have no biological father. I mean, I must have a biological father, but I have no father in that respect. And I became a part of that family at the age of 11 and 12. And so we were all very conscious people. And Herman Ferguson was the principal of the school in which, one of the important schools in the community that allowed for us to read and understand our history, understand community control. He was very influential in the Southeast Queens Community Corporation, Jamaica Community Corporation. These are organizations that took care of the fundamental needs of the community. And so he took me in as my political father. So I had great mentors during my very, very early age. I didn't always do what they said, but I was always dependent on them for guidance, and I knew that when in doubt, they had the direction. And so at the age of 15, I went to the Corps under Sonny Carson. When he was at the South, when they were in the Ocean Hill, Brownsville, he had a school for common sense. So, and Sonny Carson was my street father. He was like someone who knew the streets, who was in Brooklyn. And so we always, had that kindness around us. So I was recruited essentially into the Black Liberation Movement through these men. And I believe that that's what put me in the position I am today. And that is that I feel good about myself. I feel that I have dedicated my life to a worthy cause. I think that there must be place in the world for dreamers, and I'm a dreamer. And I think that the dreamers are the people who put into the reality what we wish could happen, because they fight for it. And I think that the new African independence movement, through these men, have advanced and has stayed strong for a long period of time. And it's our time to take over. Now I'm almost 50. And so we look to the youth to take over from where we are. But that's where I came from as a child. The Republic of New Africa is the organization that I joined at the age of 17. While my brothers joined the Black Panther Party, I, after going to Newark and Philadelphia for the Black Power Convention, was quite impressed with, you might know him as Milton Henry, but Brother Gaidi. Milton Henry was the man that was with Malcolm X when he went abroad to organize the strategy of putting the issue of black people before the United Nations at the same time, or part of the proposed anti-apartheid proposal that was being backed by the various governments that was back in ANC for making apartheid an international crime. And so the strategy to put black people's plight before the United Nations was helped develop through a man by the name of Milton Henry, who was an attorney out of Detroit, to us known as Brother Gaidi. And Brother Gaidi and his brother Imari Obadeli, who is the president, now president of the Republic of Africa, were some of the most passionate speakers for self-determination that I had ever met at the age of 17. While I had met Elvis Cleveland, I had met Bobby Seals, and I had met David Hilly, and was impressed, there was something absent in my mind from the strategy. I supported wholeheartedly the 10-point program. I supported wholeheartedly the right to self-defense. I supported wholeheartedly internationalizing our struggle. I supported wholeheartedly community control. I think that that's what the Ocean Hill-Brownsville struggle was about, our struggle for school boards and that. I thought that that was very important stuff. But I thought that it did not have an end. So when the Republic of New Africa presented itself, and I went to Detroit to meet with Brother Herman and Brother Arthur Harris, who's been in exile almost for 20, 30 years. And Sister Nelda, we became very much impressed with the Republic of New Africa's position of 5 southern states. And so I became a member, a citizen. I renounced my American citizenship at about 16 or 17, and I became a citizen of the Republic of New Africa. Prior to becoming a citizen of the Republic of New Africa, I had participated in the Freedom and Peace Party with Brother Herman Ferguson. There was the Peace and Freedom, and then there was the Freedom and Peace. Well, while Elwood Cleveland and Angela Davis ran on the Peace and Freedom, Herman Ferguson and others ran on the Freedom and Peace. And I was part of his campaign. Matter of fact, there was only 2 or 3 of us a part of his campaign coordination committee. And we went all over the United States, all the way in New York State to get the ballots.
Was this in 1968?
1968. And we experienced a very, very important thing. We were able to talk to people of all races and colors and explain to them why Herman Ferguson was running for black people to separate from New York State. And so from both sides of the coin, we were able to see why people supported the position to separate from the United States. From New York State at that time. While white people supported our right to separate, and while black people supported our need to separate. And so, on the tail end of the Ocean Hill-Brownsville struggle, while we were involved in exposing what power really meant in controlling the school board, here we have an electoral campaign which was about the separation of powers of the people, giving each people their quantity or quality of power. and self-government and self-control of their lives. And through electoral politics, that referendum became a very important thing. And so we ran. We were able to put Herman Ferguson on the ballot. We were able to solicit support from all over the state.
This is for president. Or what Senate? For Senate. Okay.
He was running for Senate.
Oh, right. New York State.
Yeah. And we had other people on the ballot, other interesting, very creative and colorful people. But Herman at the time had been indicted and was waiting on appeal. And so there was the Ram cases, the Statue of Liberty cases. These were all things when I was 17, 18 years old. And at the same time, there was the Black Panther Party. So while we paralleled each other, one was community and one was dealing with an overall issue. And so what we had is a impasse for a while in terms of which way we were going to go in terms of separation or community control. And whether or not separation meant division from a people or power, separation of power. So at an early age, I was able to understand the distinction between racism and self-government and self-reliance. And in 1968, Herman ran for Senate. Herman Ferguson ran for Senate. And he was able to campaign all over the state. And it was a very, very, very exciting time for me. Because the option of electoral politics was put squarely before me as a young man. And while listening to, at the time, this is right after Martin Luther King had died, but many other people talking about that Percy Sutton was a part of the Democratic Club. I knew all of them. Gibson, Mayor Gibson, they all had us under their tutelage in electoral politics. They were all very impressed with Herman Ferguson's ability to get on the ballot, and were very impressed with our campaign. And I think that at the time that he became clearly on the ballot, the black political strategy had to shift, and he had to get his voice in all of the forums that was happening at the time. And so I think that the Black Panther Party in New York City, in New York State, in fact, came out clearly in support of Herman Ferguson, which was in somewhat contradiction to the support for Elwood Cleaver and not particularly Elwood Cleaver and Angela Davis, but they had a person that they were running for Senator too on the Peace and Freedom Party. So those discussions happened. So we all understood that electoral politics was not in and of itself. And so that love and that unity just bonded what we considered the Republic of New Africa and the Black Panther Party within New York, and it had always stayed the same. And so in 1968, after Herman Ferguson lost the election, obviously lost the election, but our success was tremendous. We proposed to separate Ocean Hill-Brownsville from New York State. Matter of fact, from America. Because the people in Ocean Hill-Brownsville was fed up with what had happened with the school board system. So at that point, the Republic of New Africa solicited the support of other organizations, the East, the African Teachers Association, a number of groups. And we ran a ballot, a referendum, and they had to elect representatives from each block associations to be elected to come to Detroit to hear the proposal of the Republic of New Africa. And so in that election, we were able to get as much participation as a congressional election in that area, in Ocean Hill-Brownsville at that time. And 10 people were elected. They had ballots, and they had to be put on the ballot. They ran, the whole process. So they were elected, and they were sent to Detroit as representative of Ocean Hill-Brownsville to determine whether or not the option of voting through the process already established in the so-called American Constitution is secede from New York State. Now, you have to remember, back then, I think Fort McKissick had a little separate enclave. There was Oscar Brown Sr. had a little enclave. There were different thoughts about that issue. It was a real issue. So we went to Detroit in '69. And in '69 was at the New Bethel Church, Aretha Franklin's father's church. These 10 representatives who were finishing our conference on the issue. And at this conference and at this church, at the age of 18, I became very clear that the question of separating from America, separating black people from America by controlling its resources was one of the most dangerous things that you could do. Because in that church, with men, women, and children of all ages, the United States government sent up to 300 police and shot that church up and tried to kill everybody in that church. And I happened to be on security at the time. And the defense of that church, the defense of those people by members of the Republic of Africa, the Black Legion, was some of the most heroic show of love for a people that I have ever seen at that time. And it was one of the things that crystallized in me that we could not have a movement, a serious movement, if we were not prepared to defend ourselves against attack. And I think that the attack on New Bethel was not just an attack against the Republic of Africa. It was an attack against Ocean Hill-Brownsville for electing these people and sending them to Detroit to even investigate the possibility of succeeding from New York State. And that we know now today, after the trials and all of that this was one of the highest strategic COINTEL programs of that period. And so, when we look at what happened in New Bethel, and we understand what happened in New Bethel, then we have a better understanding of what happened in Move. You see? And then when we realize that president at that time, the person that we elected to be president, was Robert F. Williams, and it all crystallized. Because Robert F. Williams, if history does right, if we learn our history within the proper context, Robert F. Williams was the main person in the contemporaneous revolutionary black nationalist movement and or black movement to pose the fundamental question of self-defense. And we do not recognize that. We as a people do not recognize that Robert Williams was significant. We always think that the struggle between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X was a struggle between militancy and non-militancy. When in fact the truth is that Robert F. Williams' role as the leader of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina, put the issue of self-defense before one of the most entrenched integrationist organizations, the NAACP. And that is where the split happened first. That's the first split. We always talk about the pamphlet split. And we always seem to talk about the split between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And that's because people really don't want to deal with the fundamental question. And that is that even if you accept that we will disagree on which way forward as a people, we must accept the fact that we have some responsibility to defend in whatever way that we think is the way we should go forward. And even if we as individuals don't feel that it's our responsibility to prepare for that defense, we must accept that it must happen. And when those brothers and sisters who take it on as their responsibility to defend our right to pursue a political objective are incarcerated, it's incumbent upon all freedom-loving people to support them. And see, and that's at the crux of why Jericho is important. That's at the crux of why Mumia cannot be killed. He cannot be executed. Because if we allow him to be executed in the context of the case that they have orchestrated against him, we will then dampen any attempt of our people to defend ourselves and our right to fight for human rights and human dignity. We all have individual responsibility. We all have individual responsibility. But we must also have a collective protective consciousness. Those two working together, we will be able to bring our expectations as a people. And I'm not just talking about black people, I'm talking about people suffering. To bring our expectations as a people to a certain level of fruition. But if we're all individuals, I might talk too long.
This is great. A lot of people don't know. People don't know about this history. That's the main thing. We founded the Deacons for self-defense.
Yes, Deacons. I mean, there's a whole history being evolved by new historians that are evolving from the new African independence movement. But that history cannot be buried in archives in the black institutions. They must be resurrected. Right. Because our youth must understand from whence we come. Right. And what it's going to take to survive. Right. And so, I was talking about the individual responsibility and the collective protective consciousness. I think that the struggle that we waged in the Republic of New Africa was not in isolation of what was happening with the Black Panther Party. In fact, while people only knew of the Black Panther Party, they did not know as much on the so-called border states, East Coast and West Coast, about the Republic of New Africa. But our collective consciousness, our collective protective consciousness was so intense, and I'm saying and I'm talking about myself and all of us who came up as brothers and sisters out of South Jamaica, Queens, because when I was let out of jail in New Bedford and came to New York, they had just arrested all of the Panther 21. And so my brother was in jail, his wife was in jail, Fanny was in jail, all of the comrades that I know. So while they were attacking us in Detroit, they were doing a sweep in New York. And our collective sense of not necessarily desperation, but this is a war. This is a war. They're after us, so let's get it on. That's what we came up with. And when we came to New York, after just going through the experience where, They tried to kill us, they beat us, they tortured us, they tried to suffocate us with carbon dioxide. And then to come to tell the stories of how you held on and how brave sisters and brothers protected the children while the bullets ate up the pews and shared with people who would understand it. And to finally say to my brothers and my comrades in the Panther Party, that Republican New Africa is down just like y'all, that was, and then they go. They're in jail. They're running. They're hiding. And so you don't have time to reflect. You have to do what you can to assist, to help, and to guide, and no one's taught us. We had never even been, some of us had never been to Vietnam. Some of us had never been to military school. Some of us, we didn't know anything except what we read. And so we were fighting a sophisticated government that had shown over years that they could topple other governments. They were continually oppressing other governments. And here we are, sneakers, leather coats, field jackets from Army and Navy stores, meeting in basements, never seeing a tap in our life. What is a tap? We hear the word, we never seen a tap. We couldn't tell if it was sitting right in front of us. We were unprepared for that type of resistance, but we were not afraid. We were not afraid. And so we did the best that we could. Members of the Black Panther Party and members of the New African Freedom Fighters, the Black Liberation Army, they did the best that they could. We had no territory to train. And so what did we do the best that we could against? And it was, if everybody saw that they were bullies was beating up on a little guy. When you're walking down the street, you see 5 or 6 big guys beating a little guy. The tendency for somebody to come to the little guy's aid is more apparent then. But if you don't see the 5 or 6 big guys beating on the little guy, and all you see is these little guys running around yelling, fire, fire, they're killing us. You guys is a bunch of bums. You guys is a bunch of radical hooligans. You have no work. And so we were being attacked by the biggest sophisticated intelligence operation in the world, outside of the Kremlin at that time. And we did not have training and sophistication to deal with it. And I think that when we look at the eventual development of the state of Israel, we become clearer about how important the Messiah was to the state of Israel. Then we understand what our movement needs to happen.
You mean the secret police in Israel?
Not only this question of secret police, the right of a nation to have in place an intelligence operation to prevent counterintelligence against their ability to grow and develop. Whether I support Mossad or don't support Mossad, that's immaterial. I'm saying we had no infiltration into the CIA. We had no infiltration into the FBI. The movie, I forget who put it, The Spook Was Set by the Door, that was fiction. We had a collective consciousness, and we hoped that a black cop, once we had picketed and struck and rallied for him to get a job, at the time we got to the precinct, would do the right thing, but that was no organized predictability. That was collective consciousness, hoping that once we integrated, that we would all look after our own. But that integration is something different than what we're talking about. And so the counterintelligence program, when Mumia goes about as an investigative reporter to determine whether or not The bomb that fell in 79, 78, 79 in August on Move, on Osage Avenue, whether or not that bomb, no, the bomb came in
85.
85. Okay, 85. But I'm talking about in 78. In 78, whether or not they were justified in the shooting and the fire and all that. No one else was going to do that for our movement except somebody who cared. And he was a part of the Black Panther Party, so he knew he had to look for the hidden agenda because these people were going to trial. You see. And so, if we don't have investigative skills in our own community to investigate the things that are going on, to understand the distinction between disinformation and information, and to counter the counterintelligence, then we will be victimized consistently by counterintelligence. And so, under international law, when a person's history is so connected to the belligerence, rebellion, or violence of the people who are oppressed, that person cannot be perceived as a criminal. And under domestic law, Mumir is being tried as a criminal. How can he be a criminal? What right do they have to try him as a criminal? If he was extradited to England or any other country, before they would send him back to America on a warrant, they would sit down and say, under the extradition treaties that we have, is this man a criminal? Well, let's look at the case. Well, it just seems like it was a shooting. One guy had a gun and was shooting at someone, and somebody ended up dead. 2 people were shot. Well, who is this guy? And then they have to decide, well, he was in the Black Panther Party when he was he was a journalist when he became an adult. He was an investigative journalist. He was a part of the movement. Well, is he a criminal? Well, we can't say he's a criminal. Well, if we send him back, will his political activities be used against him in a criminal proceeding? Yes, it will. Well, then we won't send him back under international law. So if he fits the criteria under the political offense exception to extradition, then why are we allowing the United States government to execute him as a criminal? They're outside of that jurisdiction. But we don't claim international law. They don't recognize international law. We still look for the United States within its system to treat him fairly because we still feel a part of this system. But our struggle separates us under international law from domestic law because the tendency of the oppressive government is to treat all resistance as if it's criminal. Right? You see? And so, if we don't draw a line in the sand around Mumir, who will we draw there? Who will we? Because if we do not trigger international protection for just struggle, I mean, we look at the IRA, we look at the PLO, we look at the Bosnia, we look at Serbia. I mean, look at the system. I mean, the war trials that is going on in Bosnia now. And the young man who said that his general told him to slaughter all of these people. And the United States, or the United Nations, through the leadership of the United States, gets a black woman lawyer from Texas to defend him. And she does a tremendous job defending him. And she defends him because he did not understand his implications. I mean, she's done it under international, not under human law, whether or not it was wrong or not, but under international law. And she begs for this man's life, not to be executed. And you know, they spared this man not to say that they shouldn't or they should. That's not the point. But he had a fair venue. They're not giving him a fair venue. They're not giving him a fair venue because we did have a war in 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, all the way up. We did have a war. We had a war, a racial war, just like they had over there. The only reason we weren't slaughtered by whites because we defended ourselves as much as we could. But you have what Robert Williams was saying, they were shooting at them. I mean, look at Ahmed Evans in Cleveland. Died in jail, cancer of the spine, and no one even knows of it. There's so many of the people who defended our community, who went to jail under the criminal law, who was not seen by the Red Cross, who was not protected by international observers, who Amnesty International didn't support, who have died in these jails, and they have been heroes of our struggle. And we haven't done nothing about it. We must draw a line in the sand from them. We must do that. Because, I mean, Hugo Burnell, I mean, we can go on and on and on. And time won't allow. But we must really understand the context of which our struggle, this is not a phase, it's a long struggle. It's a long struggle. And so, Colin Telfer was not only physical, it was mental. By refusing or putting people in a position to feel that if they support the people who fought for them, by putting them in a position to feel that they would be targeted, that they would be imprisoned under the grand jury system, that they would lose their jobs, that they would take their children, that they might have to snitch on a comrade. The psychological and emotional pressure that comes with that type of threat cannot be underestimated. I mean, even more so than the war, because that's what has paralyzed our movement today in 1998. We have a paralyzed movement. The J. Edgar Hoover COINTEL program was one of the most sophisticated programs. We cannot take it from them. It was vicious, but it served its objective. And so, COINTELPRO, low-intensity warfare, are legitimate military tactics in low-intensity warfare. And low-intensity warfare is just a method of warfare that is disguised in order not to bring in outside observers. And so when we're getting ready to have a rally, hopefully one of the biggest rallies we've had in some time in Washington, to support the existence of political prisoners, to acknowledge that the President of the United States goes to Africa.
Right.
Isn't that ironic?
It sure is.
He goes to Africa. When masses of people have supported Nelson Mandela here in the United States, at the sacrifice of other freedom fighters here, while we were in jail supporting his freedom, our people were supporting the freedom of a political prisoner in South Africa and not even acknowledging that we existed. And I don't think we exist without contradictions. But that's not an acid test, because if that was an acid test, the criticism around Mandela would be different too. I mean, the Winnie Mandela situation and all of that, I'm not here to discuss that. I think that they have the right to resolve their own contradictions like we have a responsibility to resolve ours. But I do think that it is a clear contradiction that you can support people who fight for their liberation 6,000 miles away, and not support yours here.
Of course, the role of the media, the big business media, has a big part in terms of not even letting people know that there's a Mutulu Shakur that exists, and us to demonize the liberation fighters here through the media, because the role of the media is just so insidious. It's all part of the COINTELPRO program, except for a few alternative media here and there that let people know that political prisoners do exist.
That's where individual responsibility comes in. When you look at the movie Rosewood, you look at the new and upcoming actors and the power that they are getting, the work and the Malcolm X period back a couple of years ago. I mean, the search for the mafia type to present. There's so many historical, heroic. Shasha Brown was just a tremendous human being for us in the 60s, in the 70s. Twyman Myers, a young man who fought hard for black people, who was shot over 40 times in the streets of the Bronx. We're talking about, adventure? You're looking for these type of so-called tough guys? There's so many. Frankie May Adams, Assata Shakur, Muhammad Ibn what are we talking about? Where are you going for your adventure? Make stories out of our heroes. Why you gotta go somewhere to find it? That's your responsibility. That's not the media. You can disguise it. You don't have to say their real name. And then let them search for the truth. You think all the stories we see on the TV about the mafia is true? All the names are true? No, they just give you a bunch of soup and you go for it. We have to take responsibility for ourselves. When I was in Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe during the war, and I was able to see that we have an impression that only those people who stand up straight, look clear, are going to be